So welcome everyone to our 9th episode of Slow Living, a webinar series driven by sustainability rooted in community. It's my great pleasure to welcome Crystal Egley as our guest speaker on today's episode. First off, before I get to her professional portfolio, I would just like to say, Crystal, you are a badass. I
Oh,
appreciate the energy and strive you have embodying in which it radiates outwards in the community. Seriously, I can't thank you enough for being here today. So for those of you who don't know Crystal,
thanks.
she's the
Badass is like the
co-founder.
best compliment.
Oh, anytime. So for those of you who don't know Crystal, she is the co-founder of Inclusive Journeys, a resource for people of marginalized communities to identify safe and welcoming businesses and spaces. Currently, Inclusive Journeys is spearheading a fundraising campaign and project aimed to creating a digital green book, which will allow individuals to research, rate, and comment on businesses and establishments in terms of being safe and friendly, as well as being owned and operated by people of marginalized identities. Basically, it's the Yelp um, for marginalized identities and communities, which is phenomenal. So can't thank you enough for that as well. Crystal can certainly speak a little bit more about that project on today's webinar. But specifically for today's episode, we will be discussing the topic of hunting for sustainability. This entails hunting for food, why people do it, and why Crystal does it, what it means to her in regards for waste reduction, where hunting license dollars go, and how all different types of people are hunters. Before I give Crystal the mic, I would just like to remind the audience that we do a Q&A section at the end of the webinar. So if you have a question during her presentation, please type it in the chat box and I will call on you specifically to ask Crystal your own question. So without further ado, Crystal, the floor is all yours.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Yes, my name is Crystal. I live just north of Denver in Thornton, Colorado. And I can't stop looking at my little side thing. I'm just like, oh, is my hair? Okay, so we're good. We're good. All right. So one of the things that I'm here to talk about today is hunting, a subject in which if I tuned into a webinar a few years ago, I would immediately click end and I would get out of here. But yeah, taking up hunting really changed my life in a lot of ways. And spoiler alert, at the end, I'm gonna kind of wrap my how I got into hunting story into how that journey ended up allowing me to greatly reduce waste in ways other than food as well. So a little bit background about me. I grew up in rural Vermont. My house was in the middle of the woods, just like everybody else's house in Vermont. So I grew up backpacking, camping. I was, born with a fishing rod in my hand, and I love all that. Except, and hunting's like a pretty typical thing in Vermont, but it was not for me. Like I was just like, nope. My dad is actually when he was growing up, he had a lot of friends. By a lot, I mean about 3 friends who died from gun accidents when he was a small child. Playing at a friend's house, and they found a gun, one of their parents' guns or something, and ended up shooting themselves or another friend. And so, as a result, he was really scared of firearms. Good reason, right? And he instilled that upon us. So I grew up my whole life for the last, so I'm 36, proud of it. I'll tell anybody my age, but it wasn't until I was well into my 30s that I just thought a gun could go off and just kill someone, just randomly, sitting there. And I still feel that way. So this is not about guns. I'm terrified of guns. I don't want to convince anybody one way or the other about guns, but I am giving you the heads up that I'm going to talk a little bit about them in case you're one of those people like me who's a little bit isn't hunting synonymous with guns? So just a little bit of a trigger warning. Oh wait, that's trigger warning. A little close to home there, huh? Anyway, so I am going to be talking about hunting and guns, but in a slightly different way than y'all might be used to hearing about. So I used to work for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and my job was as a videographer for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And so I had to naturally film things about like our state parks, right? Fishing and rock climbing and all that stuff. But one of the things Colorado Parks and Wildlife does is sell the hunting licenses and manage the wildlife, the big game you can hunt, the non-game species as well. And so yeah, it ended up being my job to go out and film hunters, which made me super uncomfortable because there was a lot of people with those click boom thingies, right? So the first thing I did to go out and kind of get used to it was I actually went out and filmed some women who are archery hunting. They were bow hunting for elk, right? And I remember going out with them and being like, I hope you don't get anything because I'm gonna cry. And they just kind of laughed at me. Um, so that was like my first experience with hunting, and that experience changed like my whole life. It just changed my whole life. So I went out with Donnell Johnson and Lisa Thompson, who are like pretty well known, at least around here in Colorado. And we got lost in the middle. Like it ended up being night, and we're like army crawling through like willows in a swamp. And like Donnell actually owns a mapping company, and we don't even need the maps, right? This is the stuff like they teach you about. They're like always have maps with you, always have like the GPS, always have a physical map. That's like literally her life. And we were like, pretty sure the truck's that way, let's just keep walking. Okay, so just trust me, always bring a map and always have that GPS. I am super good with directions, and I never, ever would have guessed, never in a million years, that I would be that one person who would walk in circles when lost. And you know what? We just walked in circles, walked in circles. And by the time we got back to the house where all of their like click boom friends were staying and swapping those hunting stories and stuff, we were so tired. We were so tired. And yet we stayed up like super late just to tell the stories that every other person had throughout the rest of the night. Like we stayed up till like 2 a.m, just like telling these stories. We got up at 4:30 the next morning, had breakfast. This breakfast, I sat down and I looked at my plate, and there were eggs, there was bacon, and then there were these sausage links. And I said, where did these sausage links come from? And they told me this like big story. This is 4:30 in the morning. We had like 2 hours of sleep. And I'm like, tell me the story about the sausage. And they told me this like amazing story about going hunting and how they shot like this elk, and it was like someone was in like a ditch, and a fox jumped over their heads, and they like couldn't move because there was like elk. This amazing story. And I was like, whoa. And I was like, thank you so much, elk. Your life was well lived. And I was like, I'm gonna eat you, and I'm gonna cherish every bite. And then I was like, where did the bacon come from? And they said Walmart. And I just went, oh, thank you, elk. Thank you so much. And then I was just eating this Walmart bacon, right? So then it was like a couple hours later, and I was thinking about that breakfast, and I was like, those two things were both alive at one point, and I cared so much more about the one that there was a connection to, even if it was, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Oh, bacon. Oh, okay. Now, here we go again. So even though it was like a little bit of 6 degrees there, I still had a connection with that sausage. And you better believe I like ate every piece, and I had a very intentional respect for it. And the bacon, I was just like, bacon's super good. Walmart, yay. I didn't think about it at all. And from that breakfast on, I could not get that feeling out of my head. Like I could not get rid of that feeling. I didn't want to waste a single piece of that elk sausage. I didn't want to I wanted to respect it. I wanted to just really think about its life. Like, was it living in a forest. Like, what was that forest like? Did it die looking at the sunset and the bacon? I'm just like, who cares? I think about the Walmart shelf, you know? So after a while, some friends at work, everybody's hunts at Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and one of my friends made it her personal mission to somehow get me to hunt. I did not realize she and my partner were in cahoots about that, but she had made it her personal mission, and she didn't even know I had this other story, and so I ended up having to transport a firearm for work, and I was crying over it. I couldn't get it into the car. I was crying, and I was like, I'm never going to be a hunter because I have to shoot guns. And so the middle part of the story, that's a thing for another day. But I ended up working through the terrifying fear of firearms, which was debilitating. And I ended up realizing that I didn't need to get rid of that fear. It was, in fact, people would tell me that it made me like the safest person they could be around with firearms, because I'm always like, are your safeties on? Did you check to see if it's loaded? Let me see your chamber. Stop. I am not going to move anywhere until I see everyone's chamber. And so, yeah, I got to be pretty well known for being like the person who, you can't be like, I'm like the hall monitor of like hunting, you know? So once I got tricked into going pheasant hunting, another story, and then I ended up going out on a turkey hunt, and I didn't get anything on the pheasant hunt, but I went and got this turkey. Again, another absolutely off the wall story to go along with that. It involved a ground blind blowing into a river and like just all this really nutty stuff. But once I got that turkey, I refused to let it go. I wouldn't let it go. It was the first thing I'd ever killed, harvested, what have you. And it was lying on the ground, and it was not even full grown. It was like a Jake, so it was probably just a couple years old. And I could not stop looking at it. And I didn't cry, but I just kept petting it and petting it and petting it. And I told it was really beautiful. I don't know if you've ever seen a turkey up close. They're not beautiful. They're gross. Their faces are all weird. But in that moment, it was like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I couldn't even describe what it was like. And I just kind of picked it up and I held it like a baby. And the woman who had taken me on as her project to get me to start hunting was like, it's a lot easier if you swing it around over your back by the neck. And I was just like, no. I just held on to my dead turkey that I just slaughtered. And then the landowner drove over in his pickup truck, and he asked if he needed me to help him carry it. And it was so heavy. And I just remember being like, no, I am carrying my turkey. It is so beautiful. And he was like, I wouldn't expect anything less. And it was like this moment with like, that Sam, what is that guy's, what is that dude's name? The Sam with the cowboy hat and the mustache. I don't remember what his name is.
I don't know.
The movie guy. Anyway, it was like this like rancher who's like, I wouldn't expect anything less, dear. And so, yeah, so I processed the turkey myself. My friend who was with me, her name's actually also Crystal. She helped me field dress the turkey, and I was so careful. I didn't even realize it, but she said she had never seen somebody take off every single bit of possible food they could from that turkey. Like, I also didn't want to waste any of it. So I hung the fan, the big turkey fan, the tail on my wall in my kitchen so it could remind me of where my food comes from. I pinned out the wings and donated them to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife education section so that I could, the turkey could go on and live on in educational minds of the young ones. And I can tell you, I'm going to end with this one story about like how little food I wasted because of that. So I had this big turkey leg, right? stuck it in a crock pot, put it on high. Not how you cook game meat, right? I burned the crap out of that thing. And when I took it out of the crock pot when I got home from work that day, it was like this charred, nasty thing. It's not that yummy stuff you eat at Disney World. It was like this gross drumstick of leather. And if I had gotten that from a store, I would have thrown that in the trash can. I would have absolutely just thrown it in the trash can and been like, oops, you know? And I sat there and it took me an hour to get every single bit of meat I could off of that bone. And I ended up putting it in a stew. I cut it up super, super small, put it in a stew, and I ate the whole thing. And since that day, that is now why, even though I am absolutely terrified of firearms and I do not like going around killing animals, I just, that day was the day I realized that I need a connection to my meat. I need a connection to my food. And if I'm upset about it, that's okay. Like maybe I should be, you know, like I don't want to feel the way I felt about that bacon. I don't want to feel nothing with my meat. I want to have that connection. And in order to have that connection, like I might have to go out and shoot it myself. And that's it's really hard. It's really hard to think about. But on the other hand, I'm always thinking, you know, it should be hard to take that life, right? So, what else did I promise to talk about? Oh, and it turns out that one of the big things that I am super, super big on letting everybody know too when I talk about hunting is that when you buy a hunting or fishing license, that money actually goes directly towards wildlife conservation. And that's not just like to make elk herds or deer herds or anything like that. It's also for the non-game species. You know, marmots and songbirds and all that other stuff, wildlife habitat for all species that live in Colorado. So I always actually think that's really cool. And I will pause there and see if there's any questions at this point.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you, Crystal, for your stories. I mean, that's pretty incredible because we don't think on a day-to-day basis where our meat even comes from. And so, I mean, hearing it firsthand from even your perspective, not even being a hunter, that's pretty incredible that you took that leap. So thank
Yeah,
you for that presentation.
it was a pretty big deal. Thank you for the time to share.
Yeah, of course. Um, so I wanted to start off the Q&A section with my own question.
Great.
And so going off of now you're somewhat of a seasonal hunter or a
Yeah.
seasoned hunter, I should say. What has been the biggest surprise to you about Colorado's hunting culture in particular?
Oh, actually, that's not a surprise. How do I say this? Yeah, it's aggressive. It's aggressive. So one of the things I did was what everybody does when they first start a major new, let's call it an identity hobby, a hobby that involves some sort of identity. So be it gardening, quilting, or anything like that, marathoning. You go to Facebook groups, right? Like that's what a lot of people do. Some people don't. Some people go to in-person groups. Weirdos. But you know, like Facebook groups is the first place I go. And so I went online and I was like, hey, hunting, like Colorado. And I'm not going to tell you which group it was, but there is a very aggressive group out there where it was like people were asking these really innocuous questions like, how do I get into hunting? And, you know, what's a recipe I could use for the first deer I ever shot? And the like the comments were these horrible things like, why don't you just Google it? And like, go back to, like, if somebody said, I just moved to Colorado, they would say things like, go back to California, you fill in the blank. And it was really not a great place if you weren't like them, right? So if you weren't this like stereotype of what we all think hunters are, if we just kind of draw a stereotypical image in our head. And I was like, nope, click out. And so I looked around for some other groups and I didn't really find one. So I ended up making one for myself. And I called it Hunters Like You, so that if you're a liberal like person who is like me, who's terrified of firearms like me, and you're a vegan, I don't know why you would be a vegan. No, I'm just kidding. Who hunts for their own food, for their own meat. Like maybe you're like, I'm a vegan, but I want to hunt my own food. You can come to our group. We won't say anything about it. Like you can just be yourself 100%. There's a lot of people of color. There's people from the LGBTQ community in there. Literally vegans except for what they hunt, or vegetarians except for what they hunt. And we have a zero tolerance policy there. I don't stand for that stuff, because every single hunting license dollar goes back into making Colorado freaking amazing, right? So we cannot afford to alienate anybody who wants to hunt for whatever reason it is, right? So I don't care what you believe. Like there's this monolith of thought. Like if you're a hunter, you have to have this political belief. You have to believe in this. You have to live in this place. You have to look like this. And none of that is true. It's not true. So I just wanted a safe space carved out for those people who could just be themselves and feel welcome in a hunting community. So if you want to join, it's for anybody, even what I call hunt curious. So if you're just like, what is this? And you want to ask like the dumbest question on earth, we're the place for you. Go on Facebook and look up Hunters Like You, and we won't be mean.
No, I mean, that's incredible that you started that just because the resource wasn't out there.
Yeah,
And I mean, you're right. The norm that is right now isn't necessarily truthful whatsoever.
it's
So,
not true.
no.
Yeah, it's not. So like this dude, Jared, hey Jared, hear your Wi-Fi is spotty. Jared in the comments asking advice for someone who's new to hunting. Literally, okay, so we're the best resource ever because like not only are we just like really nice people on this Facebook group, but we also have like my partner works in the hunter education section. I'm a hunter ed instructor. There's other people from the like higher up in the hunting world and the conservation world who will answer any question you have. And we also really love hooking up people with mentors and finding mentors to guide them and give them advice. So Jared, good question. Join Facebook group Hunters Like You, and we'll hook you up with any answers that you need.
Well, thanks for the question, Jared. Appreciate that, and apologize that you couldn't ask it yourself because your Wi-Fi is a little spotty. But going off of that, you have a couple episodes on YouTube yourself. Crystal, would you like to speak a little bit about that so people could find out a little bit more?
Yes, especially for you, Jared, as well. So when I was working at Colorado Parks and Wildlife, I ended up filming myself for about a year and a half doing a series called My First Big Game Hunt. And the thing about that series is that was literally my first big game hunt, and I filmed myself going deer hunting. And we really wanted to make sure, by we, I mean me, I kind of just did that. I really wanted to make sure that you saw not just a different face in hunting, but a different approach to hunting. So every anxiety I have, my defense mechanism of making everything into a joke, all of that is in the series. And I'm just like truly myself in that. And the response was so overwhelming. It was like people were tuning in not to learn about hunting, but they were saying it's because they just wanted to see me learning how to hunt. And I feel like that's missing out of like the hunting shows you see on TV. It's always like first buy 700 rifles and a pistol and like all this, and then just get yourself a giant truck. We got this one from Ford for free. And then, it's like climb up this, 14,000-foot peak and like, use your $10,000 binoculars and scopes. And it's like, okay, well, what if you don't have any of that and you're super nervous and you don't really want to do it? Like, right? Like, I was like, I want my own food, but I don't really want to like shoot anything. So yeah, so it's just a completely different viewpoint of like watching someone going hunting, and it's not your typical learn to hunt. So you can just go on YouTube and look at that. You can either go on to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife YouTube page, or look up just if you type in my first big game hunt, you will see this face all over, and just click on episode 1 to start.
Amazing. So I actually have one more question, and that comes down to how expensive hunting could possibly be and what you just suggested. So for people, with very low income, how are they even supposed to get into hunting? How are they even supposed to make it feasible for all the gear and getting out there to have their own meat?
Yeah,
Are there
there's several
programs or is
different.
it even possible?
Mhm. There's several different answers to that. So places like Colorado Parks and Wildlife, or any other state parks and wildlife organization like Texas Parks and Wildlife, they have things like novice hunts, novice hunter programs. Colorado Parks and Wildlife, I love the Women of Field programs and youth novice hunts and stuff, and they will have every single thing you need. So you just have to sign up for those. Just go find them online. But if you just want to do it kind of like on your own, or you're like, I'm not going on one of those like COVID cesspool hunts these days, right? I can't sign up for that. You can do it. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but what you need is social capital. This is what I learned. So social capital is like, if I want to bring my friend hiking and they've never been hiking before, up a 14er, I'm not going to let them go in flip-flops, right? So if I have an extra pair of hiking boots, I will give them the hiking boots. That's lending your social capital to, like, that them, so therefore they can borrow your stuff, so they can go up and hopefully not have blisters or frostbite all over their feet. But with hunting, if you want to go for like cheap, the first time you should go, do not buy everything you need to go hunting, just in case you don't love it. Okay? If you try to buy everything they tell you need to buy and it's not for you, that's a problem. So find somebody, perhaps on the Facebook group, hunters like you, who has stuff you can borrow, and just borrow it from them. Also, people get really hung up on camo. I have recently discovered, like, animals do not care that much what kind of camo you're wearing. So don't let anyone tell you you need very specific camo. Go to a thrift store. Okay? Just go to the thrift store. But what a lot of the traditional, I mean that actually by anybody who has hunting in their family, anybody, just get stuff passed down to them generation after generation, be it firearms or anything like that, even knowledge. So just finding a friend who can lend you their social capital, that would just do the trick for you for the first year or two. And then, yeah, just like you're not going to mess up trying. There's no such thing as messing up trying to look at a big game brochure, small game brochure, or trying to get more information. It can be really scary because it seems like this thing that's for like this group of people. Don't let them fool you into that. You cannot fail trying. So just try.
I couldn't agree more. And especially with all the resources that are readily available and free, if it's something you're interested or something you might be interested in, it's worth a try.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, I mean, as a vegetarian myself, I have a lot of family members that like to hunt, and I'm actually going on a hunt. So, I really appreciate all of your insight and all of the resources that you've created and provide. So, I can't thank you enough.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for being here today. We are at the end of the webinar. And
My pleasure.
so, everybody who tuned in, thank you. And Crystal, I can't thank you enough for all of your insight and education today.
Well, I thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate everybody who tuned in.
Well, everybody, as we always like to say, respect each other and respect your mother. You have a wonderful rest of your evening. Thanks so much.